What is the longest conversation you've had where you pretended to know about something? I run a sports card store. We added a Magic the Gathering section 8 months ago. So to answer the question, 8 months. We hired a guy now for that. I spent about half an hour listening to an Irish man speak to me in a bar in Amsterdam. I agreed with him when prompted to, laughed when it seemed appropriate, and had no idea what the frick the guy said the entire time. Nice man though. And now you have to dress up like a pirate on the Today Show. I work as a lifeguard. The spa we have beside the pool recommends you don't spend more than 15 minutes in it at a time. Every other day a customer asks why this rule is in place, and each time I try to come up with a somewhat reasonable sounding medical answer. I genuinely do not know the correct response. I can think of 2 good reasons. 1. To let other people use the hot tub. 2. If you have blood pressure problems and overheat you could black out. It was about buying a house. I went into a row of show homes just because I wanted paper floor plans to use to make some houses. This man takes his sim seriously. Not a conversation, but maybe relevant. First year of university, philosophy class. Final grade was divided between a paper on whatever subject we chose. Mine was sex, death and motherhood in John Irving's novels, and an exam. So we get to the final exam and the whole thing is writing an essay on the theme, Plato or the fear in an educative context. I had no idea what that meant. I had skipped the relevant classes and I honestly hadn't the foggiest idea what Plato had to say about fear or education. So I just wrote. I wrote for 2 hours and went through a lurid of paper. I remember writing about the gods in ancient Greece being jerks and a horrible example. I remember writing about classic children's tales being originally very macabre and having been bowdlerized. I have no idea what I wrote, but I wrote a lot. I got 8/10 in both the paper and the exam. To this day I still think the prof gave me a high grade so she wouldn't have to read the whole thing. I work in the neuro department at a hospital. As a volunteer, half the people are speaking gibberish and expect me to understand. I've gone on hours-long conversations with people where their words have no meaning. In a similar vein, I did a summer internship at an engineering firm, and the amount of jargon words and acronyms that were apparently common knowledge was simply bewildering. Halfway through the summer they pointed out that there's some 500-page PDF containing all the company acronyms. I was recently on holiday in Croatia. There were boats running to a party island which were free all night. I was standing at the front with my arms folded when a girl asked me how much it was. So I told her an amount. She said that was expensive and so she bartered with me for about 5 minutes until we agreed a price. I then asked her and her friends for photo ID, patted them down, not in a creepy way. Kept it all going for about 10 minutes and 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 10 minutes. I was also drunk out of my face and didn't even know it had happened until my friends told me the next day. Several years ago, there was a party at our town hall. I had a date with a girl. We agreed to meet inside the hall at the bar. Before going inside, I lined up for some fries. Some older dude in the line started chatting me up about a recent soccer game. We talked about the game and about soccer in general for about an hour. Both of us had a great time. I was never interested in soccer and to this day I know little to nothing about it. The little that I knew about that specific game, I heard on the radio on my morning commute. Later that night, I learned that the guy was the father of the girl I dated that evening. Eventually, she became my girlfriend. That was nearly 5 years ago. We're still going out. Yay. And her dad starts talking to me about soccer every time I see him. He still has no clue, or at least I hope so. This almost reminds me about something I read back in my infancy of Reddit about a guy who faked a NZ accent when he started school, met a girl, fell in love. 4 years later wants to propose but she has no idea that he's just a boring American from the Midwest and doesn't have family down under or anything else that has to do with that life he created. I was at a party and was talking with a group of people. Somehow, the subject of astrology was brought up. I was pretty whiskey drunk and decided to do some astrological readings in the room. I'd ask them what their birthday was, and start by guessing what their sign was, and tell them about their astrological traits, which I based entirely off of their behavior that night. Let me say that firstly, I don't know anything about astrology. I only know that some signs are in the spring months, which ones are in the fall, etc. etc. I just got extremely lucky by guessing everyone's sign on the first try, which instantly gained some trust. Secondly, I don't believe in astrology at all. Like I said, I was drunk and felt like being kind of an butthole. Thirdly, I didn't know anyone there except for the friend that brought me there, who was asleep on the couch. Anyways, everyone wants to hear that they are struggling with X but will get over it because they are Y and will eventually achieve Z. I'd start talking to them and feel them out a bit and just told them what they wanted to hear, just changing out the variables. One guy, a friend of a friend, was really awed by what I told him. He said it was life-changing. No one knew the real him like I did. That he was going to start studying astrology. I was in deep fellas. I felt like crap. But I had just given an entire room amazing astrological readings. I was on a roll. I felt like a drunken douchebag god. Anyways, I just let him go on believing in astrological crap because I am a terrible person. There were a few people that I was kinda striking out on, but I just finished up quickly and move on to the next. And that's how I conned a whole room based on absolutely nothing. The entire conversation lasted over an hour. TLDR. Faked being an astrologist at a party so good, I converted a non-believer. Once, as a younger lad, I stole a set of scrubs from a hospital. Upon realizing just how comfortable they were, I would don the purloined scrubs whenever I wanted to feel comfortable and didn't give a dang about how I looked. Years later, while employed as a journalist and on board a jet bound for a gold mining operation in Colombia, I sat next to an eager young physician who had been hired as the new camp doctor. I was wearing my scrubs, just the top, because I was mildly hungover and making a half-hearted attempt at getting drunk again. SOP. For journos taking flights to crappy locations they don't want to go, to interview crappy corporate people for a crappy puff piece that they don't want to write. Rather than explain to my seatmate why I was really there, it seemed easier to just grunt and nod when he wrongly assumed I was also a new doctor, on my way to join the medical corps in camp. The flight was less than 6 hours. Plenty of time to sober up and realize that I was much too far down the rabbit hole now to fess up to who I was, so I just went with it, and he was asking all sorts of stuff. Where I studied, how my residency was, what fields I found particularly interesting, etc. So I just lied. I prevaricated, obfuscated, dodged and shimmied my way through the whole flight, made it all up on the spot, was vague where I could be, and let him answer his own questions whenever possible. When I ran into a topic that I absolutely couldn't fake, I waited until he went to the washroom, then googled the answer to regurgitate when he came back. We got off the plane, shook hands, made plans to have a cocktail and discuss the relative merits of our Latina nurses after we'd met them, and headed off in separate directions. I saw him the next day, while on tour with a bunch of VPs. We were being shown all around the mining operation, which of course included their shiny new med center. The doc spotted me, now wearing my suit and tie and deep in conversation with their COO, and he gave me the oddest look. TLDR. 6-hour flight with a doctor who thought I was one too because I was wearing stolen scrubs. In my late teens I used to work in the garden of a mansion close to where I live. The mansion worked as a hotel, had weddings and conferences, that kind of thing. This particular place is well known for its apples. They have over 100 apple trees on the grounds, and my job was to prune these trees. Now, this might sound like I'm some kind of expert, but really, it was just some guy pointing and saying, "You see the branches that look like this? Yeah, cut those." Unfortunately, people seem to assume that since I was working there I was some kind of apple demigod. So every now and then someone walking around in the garden would see me up in the trees and they would ask me something like, "What time of year should I prune this special kind of apple tree that you've never even heard of, or which time of year is this type of apple best harvested?" These were mostly old upper class ladies who got all frowny when I told them I didn't know crap about apples. So eventually, I started to just make crap up whenever I got asked about the apples. Hello there, young mister. I was thinking about bringing some apples home to make a pie for my grandchildren. Do you think these will do? Someone would ask, and I'd gasp as if it was the end of the world. Oh god no, those are not for pie. I'll tell you what, guests are not normally allowed to pick from these, but well, if it's for your grandchildren. These apples are imported from Brazil and were actually genetically engineered to be half apple, half mango. They are just smashing in a pie this time of year. Absolutely delightful. The ladies would giggle and nod. No complaints would be filled at the gardener who doesn't know anything about apples, and I could go back to cutting those branches that looked kind of like the one my boss pointed at earlier. For anyone wondering, despite my username, this is a true story. My grandfather owns an apple orchard, and despite the fact that my mom grew up around them, she doesn't know much about them. But whenever we went apple picking, she would unleash some wisdom, and suddenly we would have strangers asking 1,000 questions about trees and the fruit. This sounds exactly like something she would say. I was on a train sitting next to an older Australian gentleman. Fitting seeing that I was in Australia. The train was stopped due to a bushfire raging further down the tracks. We had a pleasant conversation about said fire of the bush for about 2 hours while we waited. I had never been affected by, seen, or heard of a bushfire before sitting next to this man, though that didn't stop me from pretending to know what I was talking about for the next 2 hours. We had such a good sense of camaraderie going, I didn't want to ruin it. One light turned to another, and before I knew it I was an expert on the subject. Yeah, IDK, I'm a C. I took a beer class in college. I love beer, but didn't have much interest in learning about different malts, hops. I just wanted to drink, which I did. At the end of the semester, we had to do a project to teach the class about decoction, which is something related to brewing. I made a children's book with a series of 4 stories loosely based on beer, Golden hops, and the 3 beers being my favorite. I made it in a few hours while I was at work, and it involved a lot of coloring with crayons. My co-workers, well aware that I was a senior in college, saw me and my crayons and jokingly asked if it was for school. It was. Anywho, as I was going over it with the teacher, he closed the book, paused, and said, "Do you have any idea how well you have to know the material to be able to do something like this?" I knew nothing. I have a friend who is a compulsive liar and hates being called out on it. He also loves calling other people out for lying, for whatever reason. Well, one day I'm at his house with a few other friends when he starts making up this story about how he found out about the railgun project that the Navy is working on. I didn't doubt that was a thing, but I seriously doubted he knew anything about it. My other friends instantly start calling him out, but he's adamant that he knows all about it, so I decide to join in with him. The look in his eyes when I said I knew about it too. He desperately wanted to call me out, but knew he would out himself in the process, so he decided to check what I knew. We spent about an hour making up facts about this thing before he finally cracked and admitted to making up the whole thing. Good time all around. Was in Italy. I only spoke English. They only spoke Italian. We ate breakfast together for 3 mornings straight. Not one of us understood a word the other was saying. Not a single word. Yet somehow we laughed, nodded, frowned, smiled, and everything else when appropriate. We talked for 20 minutes each morning. At the end of our trip we got pictures together and each gave a long goodbye speech that the other didn't understand a single word of. We are now Facebook friends. They post nice pictures. We have this whole relationship, but it's not really clear based on what. Oh man, I had this happen with Germans and French people. I love it. I once pretended for about 2 hours that I was an animal rights campaigner campaigning for rights for malarial mosquitoes and zebras just for the sake of winding up someone on a political forum. Worth every second. Best reason to pretend to know something. I gave a lecture of how to speak French for 30 minutes to some guys in my classes that wanted to flirt with a French exchange student. When I have 0.005% of French knowledge, I invented words and phrases and they believe everything I said. They even made notes. Je m'appelle Claude. Je me floob flob. Every time I talk about NFL with any one of my friends, I'm also the commissioner of our fantasy league going on 3 years now. Pro sports in general, I love but I'm not gonna take the time to learn every single freaking player's name. That's not on my team, at least. Don't even get me started on stats. When a friend of mine talks about Radiohead, I just go with it. I've only listened to OK Computer. He talks Radiohead a lot. Yeah, same here, although I've only listened to The Bends, which is apparently one of their less popular albums. Not my proudest moment, but I once got in a pee contest with some jerk who went to college with my brother who was trying to play off like a huge intellectual. It was really obvious and painful that we were trying to one-up each other, but neither could give in. Eventually I dragged a reader into it, at which point I just prayed for it all to end quickly because it was such a pathetic reach of a last-ditch effort. My saving grace was that he clearly didn't know what I was talking about. Neither did I. I spent an hour in a lecture on deconstruction in college and all I got out of it was that the dude was French. There should be some sort of Godwin-like law about the reader. When I used a cocktail, I had a bit of a crazy regular. I've written about her before, but essentially she thought that children were from an alternate reality, and that by coming to our dimension, they had taken away everlasting life from humanity by draining our life force. When we were slow and she would come in, we'd have the best conversations. I'd read the Philip K. Dickian novelization of this in a heartbeat. I grew up with several accents and dialects: Minnesota, Texas, Welsh grandmother etc. I've got a good ear for them, and I'm a great bullshitter. I met a bunch of drunk Belfastians and managed to bulls myself as a North Coaster for almost 15 minutes. I kept the conversation away from details of home and focused on opinions. Eventually they asked a question I couldn't dodge, so I fessed up, but they were pretty impressed. Proudest moment: knew nothing. Every day at work people ask me to go find a good insert fruit vegetable for them. 90% of the time I can't tell if a fruit is good or not, so I just pick up a few and then hand them one. We had a Final Four style debate in my high school history class about the JFK assassination and if we were for or against the conspiracy theory. I managed to bluff and comically dismiss questions I couldn't answer. I made it to the final two and conceded victory to the girl who took a day off school to go to the National Archives to research her side. Sorry, Mr. Wagner. People at work always expect everyone to have these big long stories about their latest holiday. Me and my girlfriend usually just go no matter where, sun is guaranteed. The hotel looks nice and drinks are all in. Not much to tell if you just laid on a beach for a week getting drunk. So I come up with these ridiculously complicated and detailed bull stories about the local culture of the places I've been to. They get a little longer and more insane every time I have to reiterate them to the next person. TLDR. Some of my colleagues now think dogs are a delicacy on the Greek island of Corfu. Currently in Corfu, many dogs. I work as a lifeguard, and on a particularly bad day there were a ton of jellyfish in the water, and we had to deal with at least 50 stings. Our treatment for that is vinegar and baking soda. They always asks what this does, and each time I had to try and come up with some excuse that sounded legit. It was usually around the lines of when a jelly stings you, there are stinger receptors on the tentacles that separate from the jelly and transfer themselves into your skin. And the combination of the baking soda and vinegar disables the stinging receptors from firing, based on half logic, half bulls. As an electrician, I like to actually know the answers, so I get in the habit of looking them up on the internet and answering other people's questions there. That way I'll be prepared to know what I'm talking about when someone asks me in real life. I used to work at a retail store, and one night before close a man approached me in a wheelchair. He had long grey hair, burns on his face, and his legs were gone from the knee down. His voice was so hoarse, I would have had to bend over and put my face 3 inches from his face to hear clearly, but for a good 30 minutes I stood there nodding as he described what I made out to be. The US government owes his $10 million for blowing his legs off. B. He is half Native American. D. His son is very nice and I should meet him. All I could do was mutter out the occasional yes and oh yeah, because he would pause at times and wait for responses, but I would have no idea what he asked. He told me his name was Hawk and ended the conversation by looking down at my feet and saying, "Man, you got some pretty toes." I then wheeled him to the elevator, at his request. I'm honestly not sure. I have the sort of head that recalls a lot of things and can link things together well, so I tend to know more than I actually know on a whole range of things. Sometimes I can't tell where the BS begins and the knowledge ends. I seem to have convinced a whole bunch of people that I'm sane though, so that's fun. And even if I have absolutely nothing even remotely related, I can usually at least make up a reasonable guess. I'm still on this 6-year streak of people at work thinking I watch sports. I get invited to join the football fantasy league every year. I haven't watched a football game in years. Me and my girlfriend consistently pretend to be diet experts when we go to the gym. We get asked tons about our diet because we're both in pretty good shape, but it's mostly just attributed to the fact that I'm half Chinese and she's full. So whenever we get asked, generally by middle-aged white people, we come up with the most obscene responses. A few months back we were asked by some guy in his late 40s and his wife what we did to stay in shape. And we told him that we both drink an egg yolk mixed with chicken stock and pancake syrup before we go to the gym every single day. The next day these old folks show up with these magic bullet mugs, and inside is the most ungodly and disgusting looking beverage I've ever seen. All they said was thanks, and gave us cheers. Once spent about 20 minutes telling a guy about the space kennels I'd been designing alongside NASA for the last few years. He was buying it as well. I might have forgotten to mention that he was on drugs. Sometimes when I meet new people I'll pretend I have the same hobbies as them just so they feel comfortable talking about them. It usually works pretty well. They spill their heart out about it and I blindly agree with them. I accidentally walked into a class in my free period on my first day at school, and people assumed I had the class. I've been taking it ever since and I still don't really know what's going on. Not me, but my friend's story. One day, he got this random text from a complete stranger. I forgot what the actual message was, but it was clear that this message was intended for his lover. Being the interesting person my friend was, he decided to play along. He proceeded to continue the conversation and received very out of context stuff, including a picture of some elephant and tickets to a comedian's show. This goes on for about 2 hours, about a text every 5-10 minutes. When this random guy decides to call my friend, he just waits and doesn't answer. When the call ends itself, he sends "Who are you?" My friend responds with "A random stranger you sent a bunch of texts to." After a minute of silence, he responds with "Sorry, TL, DR." Friend receives text from stranger, pretends he is the intended recipient, gets all this weird crap, and finally hangs up on him. Thanks to the boundless knowledge of my husband and video games, I've picked up a lot from him. So whenever I work at cons or meet new geeky friends I can have endless conversations about games I've never played. I made a new best friend recently by reviewing and discussing BioWare's work over the last few years when the only thing of theirs that I've played is Baldur's Gate and Dragon Age. At least I do actually enjoy gaming. I just don't have the energy to put brain power behind learning useless facts and arguments. Mine was when I met a Jagallo, a groupie who wears clown makeup. I knew of one song in middle school but acted like I went to a few of their concerts and dress up. She was super hostile to everyone but me, so I wasn't going to miss the opportunity. I spent 2 months talking to kids in my school about RuneScape, telling them I was Zezima, and how I killed trolls and dragons, and I had never even heard of the game before they mentioned it. Zezima came up one of their conversations and I just followed suit. 2 years ago I posted on Craigslist that I was a psychic. People still email me from 2 years ago. I got a couple of lucky guesses and now they think I'm the real deal. It all started as a prank and now it's getting out of hand. Frickin' weirdos. I once did a social experiment. I myself am an economist. I know jack crap about biochemistry or biotechnology. My SO has a degree in the before mentioned and she had something where they could take their SO with them. So I went as she asked me to join. Apparently the other SOS had been there before and decided they knew better and stayed home. So there I was trying to talk to people who all just assumed I was one of them. They started talking about some new research projects they were doing and working on, etc. And it just all went over my head. So after excusing myself from a few conversations that were like Greek to me, I decided to play a social experiment of my own. So I went to talk to more people and they went on to talk about this and that. so I asked questions about stuff I've heard before that night. Such as, so what do you think about Dr. XXXXXX newest study about XXKLDLJDLJDKLJD? People just went on and on and on, and I just added a few more questions and saying stuff like very interesting point you made there. Turns out I managed to spend a whole evening of about 5 hours having conversations with people about stuff I still today do not know what they were on about. Thank God my soul is relaxed and took my little science experiment as a fun thing and never blew my cover. First, a little background information. I play the bass. I have never had any teaching in bass. I do not know any bass terms. I am very good at lying. I was at a party and my friend casually mentioned in a conversation we were having with a group of her friends that I play the bass. So did one of her friends. For the next 2.5 hours I was sitting there talking with this chick I have never met before about bass. The only genuine thing I said was the gigs I've played. Everything else was lies. I spent the first half hours just listening to her talk and then I used the terms she used to explain what she had done in ways that seemed plausible and appropriate. After 2.5 hours we were done with talking and just ended up making out for an hour or so until her friend got so wasted she had to follow her home. TLDR. Faked a 2.5 conversation about something I knew little about, to then get cock-blocked by a wasted chick. I once was standing at the top of the stairs of a bar that was really packed. Some people started showing me their IDs when they got to the top even though they showed it at the front door to get in. Once I started checking a few, I got into full bouncer mode and was checking everyone's. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.